My online students are going to wonder why I'm in athleisure wear. They don't know it's pajama day at Newton. So, first things first, what is covered on quiz 4? And look, I know I haven't graded the midterms yet. I'm working on it, I promise. No rush, huh? Yeah. So, we deviated a little bit from the syllabus. It may be more useful to here pull up the PowerPoints. So, I haven't posted the Jazz Age PowerPoint. I'm sorry, I thought I did that last night. So the three that are covered are progressivism, imperialism, and that's the one where I was out. I was in South Carolina, and I posted the link to the YouTube lecture. I'll go ahead and that link is in the syllabus, but before I leave out of here, I'll go ahead and post an announcement. How about this? When I post the link to Quiz 4, I will include therein a link to my YouTube page, which has the progressivism imperialism lecture, and honestly every other lecture in this class as well. If it would be useful, if anybody prefers Kaltura, which is within iCollege, it's a screen capture, and everybody over the pandemic did this when you're stuck at home. It's basically me sitting at a desk at home going through the PowerPoint while it's capturing my screen. You can minimize my face, hopefully, and just focus on the screen. If anybody prefers that to the YouTube videos, I can make those available as well. You go up here to Course Tools, Kaltura Course Gallery. For whatever reason, the first one is in here in our class, but I can add any of the other ones as well. And that's actually not a screen capture, that's a full-on lecture, but in any case, that's what that is. And so there's the progressivism and imperialism one. There is the Great War, World War I, and then the last one we had, it's the Jazz Age and the origin of the Depression is the same thing as the Roaring Twenties and the Red Scare. I just, for whatever reason, changed the name of it, but that's the same lecture. Does that make sense? Those are the three lectures that are covered. So I didn't get a chance to do this whole Teddy Roosevelt thing and split that up and whatnot. So those are the three lectures, and these are the documents. So Turning Hawk and American Horse are Native Americans who are being interviewed by the Department of the Interior that's trying to figure out what happened at Wounded Knee. Wounded Knee was a massacre of Native Americans by American troops, unarmed Indians who were shot down with machine guns, basically. And you have it from two people one of whom was there and one of whom knew about it from talking to others who were there, exactly what went down. So just know the basics of how that unfolded and how or why this massacre occurred at Wounded Knee. And then maybe, I think they talk about therein, to them, I mean, obviously a massacre of unarmed people by armed troops is terrible, but there were a couple of things that memory served that they said, hey, this is what makes this really, really bad. Like basically they said, look, if you just shot the men who had just given up their guns and maybe posed a threat to you, it's one thing, but you went further and did X, Y, and Z. Like that's what I'm looking for. Dispatch from the Mississippi Colored Farmers Alliance, it's talking about how this is during the Gilded Age, which overlaps with the Redemption and the institution of Jim Crow and white supremacy and lynching in the South and disenfranchisement. But there was a little moment where it looked like poor black and white farmers might come together in a populist movement. And this dispatch is telling you how not poor people, white people in power under the banner of the Democratic Party at the time responded to that. And not surprisingly, is with great violence and fury. And so I'm trying to remember, the takeaway there is, I think, how do they respond to this potential for a coalition between white and black poor farmers? Jane Addams talking about the need for settlements. That's a little bit, I don't want to say it's not a tough read. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's not the easiest read in the world. I guess the takeaway there, what are settlements? We talked about this in class. They start as progressive outreach centers that are trying to help immigrants get settled in the cities, and then they move on to like becoming a daycare for immigrant kids, and then they tackle all of these other progressive issues. Let me actually, let me temporarily turn this off. I'm going to refresh my memory as to exactly what I'm asking you on these, so I don't tell you to focus somewhere that would be unnecessary. Let's see. Right, okay. And then, okay, yeah, with the Jane Addams document, she talks about who are the people who are like, she describes all these problems in the cities at the time, and it said, these are the people who are most affected by this. Like, who are those people? Who are the people that are being hurt the worst by this and that most need the outreach in question? And with the Colored Alliance, it's what exactly were members of the Colored Farmers Alliance doing that precipitated this essentially race massacre? And then the final document is fantastic. It's Du Bois, who was writing in The Crisis at the time, which is the publication of the NAACP. And Du Bois is saying, this is what America is doing to black people that leads him to say, you have to call a spade is a saying. It is what it is. What it seems to be is exactly what it is. And so the question is, what is America doing to black people that leads him to say this? And that covers those documents. As for the lectures, big takeaways from progressivism and imperialism. First of all, I mean, for both progressivism and imperialism, I think I defined them for you. And you're going to want to give me back that definition. What is progressivism? Who are the progressives? Basically answer these questions. Who are the progressives? What do they want? How do they want to do it? And if you haven't yet watched this lecture, you're going to watch it. This is going to be the first thing that I talk about, and it's an easy takeaway. And I give you some examples, like who are the muckrakers? We just talked about Jane Addams and the Settlement House movement. I think I've told you in here before, and if not, I'm telling you now, just as I wanted you to identify or give me back 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment for, I think it was quiz 3 or the midterm. Here I will ask you 16, 17, 18, 19. Establishment of the federal income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, and women's suffrage. You should understand the difference between laissez-faire government policies, that is hands-off, let them do, no regulation of the economy, deregulate corporations and big business, let the economy run itself. That's the Gilded Age. And in a progressive era, we begin to see, like with these progressive amendments and other government action, moving away from laissez-faire towards regulation. And then World War I, we see big-time regulation because it's a total war that required the government to step in and play an active role. Speaking of the amendments, one other thing, I want you to be able to tell me how or why are those considered progressive? So a 6 answer will identify them. A 10 answer will tell me, okay, the federal income tax was established as a progressive income tax where you would have higher tax brackets for very, very wealthy people and much lower tax brackets for poor people. And theoretically, the government could, if it chooses, use that tax revenue to on social programs that would help redistribute wealth in America. Direct election of senators, put the power into the direct hands of the American voter, take it out of the hands of corrupt state legislatures. Prohibition, alcohol, the temperance movement says that's the root of all evil in the cities. How do you clean that up? Make it illegal to manufacture and sell alcohol. 19th Amendment, empower women with the vote. Imperialism, I gave you a definition for that too. Not just empire building, but industrialized nations exploiting other countries economically. And I told you it's connected to industrialization in two ways, in that if you're an industrializing nation, you need access to all these resources that you may not have, or that you may not have in abundance, but you have the technology to take them by force. Steamships, artillery, machine guns, and so on. We talked about some examples of American imperialism, like the Indian Wars, exemplified by the document of talking about Wounded Knee and the subjugation of those people, and the subjugation of the Sioux and the Apache and others, and forcing them by force of arms onto reservations so that you could dig for gold and silver and oil and so on. In the treaty ports in China, and the establishment of a essentially banana republic in Hawaii, but then one that becomes a actual U.S. territory. We talked about the other banana republics in Central America that were controlled by the United Fruit Company, or Chiquita. Banana Republic is a Central American country that is more or less run by an American Fruit Company. And then you may want to take note of what does America gain from the Spanish-American War. It was all about the liberation of Cuba, supposedly. Cuba doesn't become a colony, but we get the Platt Amendment giving America control over Cuban debt and control over Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. And then after the war with the Filipinos, America takes the former Spanish colony of the Philippines, along with Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, Guam in the Pacific. Great War. Underlying causes, we went through. Imperialism and industrialization, hand in hand, is a great competition for access to resources, great competition for colonies and so on. Nationalism, the belief in the greatness of your nation, of your people, as especially exemplified in building a greater empire with access to more resources through more colonies and so on. Militarism, and the building up of the military constantly, and the sense of needing to maintain a balance of power, and everybody else playing catch up with Germany or with whomever nation that they see as militarizing. Secret treaties and alliances that are signed between these various different nations and empires. And then, of course, you'd want to know who's who. Talked about how the fighting in the war was characterized by, above all else, stalemate and trench warfare. And of importance was understanding how America goes from isolationism to involved in the war in the span of just a couple of years. Part of that was getting sucked in by making loans to nations who were buying arms from American corporations. Part of that is the Germans engaging in unrestricted submarine warfare because they know those arms are coming in on ships to Britain. And some of those ships that are sunk have American citizens on them. And then we talked about the Zimmerman telegram as well. And then two, I want you to connect that to the effort, once America's in the war, to keep Americans in support of or behind the war through this patriotic campaign, which says the war is all about freedom and democracy. It's about bringing down these autocratic empires. And it's, we're fighting for our very own freedom here at home. The Germans are evil and terrible, and we must stop them, and so on. This use of government propaganda. Talk some about the Sedition Act and how Schenck and Debs argued it was their free speech right to speak out against the war, but the Supreme Court disagreed because they said it was a, quote, clear and present danger. Main terms of the peace that comes out of this. Liberal internationalism or international cooperation is key. Using that cooperation to build upon this as a victory for democracy over autocracy. Creation of a League of Nations, but remember, America didn't join because Congress rejected the treaty. Self-determination, remember, yes, in Europe in terms of the creation of Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia out of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, and up here in the case of Poland, out of the German and Russian empires. Self-determination in the old Ottoman Empire, kind of, sort of, not really, because these mandates that are created are really controlled to an extent by Britain and France. And then no imperialism, absolutely not. Imperialism continues. The colonial empires get even larger. There's no independence for the colonies. No self-determination for the colonies. And then the big takeaway of the Treaty of Versailles with Germany is the war guilt clause, which says Germany has to pay reparations to Britain and France for the cost of the war. I don't think I asked you anything on the quiz about the Spanish flu epidemic, but remember, it was an outbreak of H1N1 virus, just one more terrible thing to come out of the trenches and affect people worldwide. You should know the definition I gave you of socialism. Social ownership of the means of production. Collective social ownership as opposed to private individual ownership. And then revolutionary socialists like Lenin believe the only way to do that is through a violent revolution. And the reality when they come to power is that you could say theoretically we have social ownership, but it's the government that is running the factories, the farms, the economy writ large, and so on, the state socialism. And when they come to power, they become the Communist Party. They outlaw all other parties and establish a dictatorship with no individual freedoms and so on, considering themselves part of this greater movement of the workers of the world to unite and overthrow capitalist governments, which is perceived as a huge threat in America.
I have a question.
Yes.
What did you say the revolutionary socialism was?
So remember, there are then and now people who are democratic socialists who believe in some level of socialism, redistribution of wealth or whatever, but also believe in a democratic political process, voting, elections, and this kind of thing. Revolutionary socialists see that as foolhardy and believe the only real way to get to true socialism would be through a violent revolution. Makes sense. What else? I'm going to have to pull the other one from elsewhere since I failed to upload it for you, and I do apologize. I will rectify that here shortly. Let's see if I did it for my online people. No. Fantastic. Well, let's see if I did it for my honors people. Yes. This was the Jazz Age and the onset of depression. If it's titled elsewhere, like I think maybe on my YouTube channel, it might be the Roaring Twenties and the, I don't even remember. If it's, thank you, the Roaring Twenties and the Red Scare, same lecture. I don't remember when or why I changed the name, but it all covers the same thing. And it begins basically where we just left off, talking about the Red Scare, which is this fear of a socialist revolution, a fear of the spread of communism, or any movement associated with revolutionary socialism or the Communist Party, especially in America. And the government starts overreacting by doing authoritarian type shit, like summarily deporting immigrants and arresting people in mass at party meetings without warrants and so on. And it's not a successful time for leaders in the labor movement like Debs. We talked about you had during the 20s 3 successive Republican regimes that are committed to not just a return to normalcy as rolling back regulations from the war, but committed perhaps to going all the way back to a laissez-faire type policy approach where you have significant deregulation of the economy, significant deregulation of big corporations or big business and so on. We talked about how this is kind of the highlight, a high time or the zenith of the second industrial revolution with the advent of mass production by way of the assembly line. Talked about how corporations start using the radio for advertising and marketing to get at the heart of that second part of your consumer culture definition. A culture in which people purchase the things they need, but in which corporations convince you that you need an endless amount of consumer products to make your life better, easier, more fulfilling. We talked about the ideas of the new Negro and the new woman. Those are important. Remember, with the new Negro, it was about Marcus Garvey and people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who you hear from in your documents this time, saying, forget the old way of thinking associated with people like Booker T. Washington. It's not about adopting to or adapting to white culture. It's not about accepting things like segregation. It's about challenging those things head on. It's about rejecting the notion of assimilation and instead embracing our African heritage, building upon that, and establishing political and cultural institutions of our own. And you're going to hear from Du Bois writing in the newsletter of the NAACP, which is a new institution. And we talked about here the creation of jazz music, an African-American cultural contribution that would stand at or near the top in terms of America's cultural contributions to the world in general. Talked about the idea of the new woman and embracing domesticity and instead working towards education and new jobs in the workforce, and then a cultural component to that is the flapper scene, if you will. And then we talked causes of the Depression, and the key takeaway there was the structural flaws in the economy, like corporate profits increasing but wages remaining stagnant, debt becoming a chronic problem, especially for farmers who are facing low commodity prices. A sort of unhealthy belief in the permanent growth of the American economy as applied especially to the stock market. And of course, there is the stock market crash, but remember that just starts the downward spiral. So you should be able to tell me on the quiz what's happening in that downward spiral after the crash, as things get worse and worse and worse. People stop spending because times are hard. They cut back and genuinely buy only what they really, really need. That hurts companies, which then have to lay people off, which that means more people who don't have the money to spend on shit, and the cycle continues. While at the same time, stocks plummet way worse than they did on Black Tuesday. While at the same time, banks are failing all over America because there is no deposit insurance and people panic about the health and, solubility of their financial institutions. And when, of course, they run to take all their money out of the banks do indeed fail. And then anybody who didn't get to the bank in time is ruined. Same thing as if you invested all your money in the stock market. I think that's about where we got. I think I said we'll leave talking about the Hoover administration for the beginning of the New Deal lecture. So that should cover everything for Quiz 4, which if I do my job, we'll post tonight and stay open, I guess, through the weekend. Questions? Anything at all? I did better than 145. You got 132. Who wins the big money on that? All right, see ya.